Prophecy Decoded. Decoded the past, reveal the future.
My friend, what I'm about to reveal will absolutely shake your understanding of biblical prophecy and its shocking connection to 5 red heifers that arrived from Texas in 2022. Just last week, while examining a secret collection of Ethiopian manuscripts that have been banned from mainstream biblical scholarship for decades, I discovered references to the red heifer ceremony that made my hands tremble with prophetic significance. In my 4 decades of studying ancient codices and end times prophecy, I have never encountered such an urgent convergence of archaeological evidence, no research, and prophetic fulfillment as we're witnessing with these 5 Texas heifers. These aren't ordinary cattle. What absolutely stunned me about this discovery is how these 5 red heifers represent the most significant step toward Third Temple restoration in over 2,000 years. Hebrew Israelites worldwide recognize these animals as harbingers of their prophetic restoration, a validation of their claims to be the true descendants of ancient Israel, and confirmation that we are living in the final moments before the Messiah's return. Have you ever wondered why 5 simple cattle from Texas could spark global attention and even threats of war from Hamas militants? The answer lies in hidden history that connects these animals to the most sacred purification ritual in all of biblical history, a ceremony so rare that only 9 red heifers have ever qualified throughout recorded history. According to ancient Jewish tradition, the 10th red heifer will be sacrificed by the Messiah himself. But friends, time is running critically short. The prophetic timeline we're witnessing in 2025, the genetic discoveries validating Hebrew Israelite ancestry, and the geopolitical tensions surrounding these heifers all point to imminent fulfillment of ancient prophecy. What I'm about to show you will forever change how you understand end-time signs, the true identity of God's chosen people, and why these 5 Texas heifers may indeed change history forever. In September 2nd, 22, 5 red heifers arrived at Ben Gurion Airport in Israel, transported from a ranch in Texas in what may prove to be one of the most prophetically significant shipments in modern history. When I first heard about their arrival through my contacts in the archaeological community, I dismissed it as merely another religious curiosity. But as I began investigating the biblical requirements for red heifer sacrifice and the Hebrew Israelite interpretations of this ceremony, I realized we were witnessing something far more momentous. The arrival of these 5 heifers sparked immediate global attention because of their connection to Numbers 19:1-2, where God commands Moses and Aaron, "Speak to the children of Israel, that they bring you a red heifer without spot, wherein is no blemish, and upon which never came yoke." These weren't just any cattle but specially selected animals, potentially met the extraordinary biblical requirements that haven't been fulfilled in nearly 2 millennia. What I discovered during my research into Hebrew Israelite communities was their profound understanding of how this ceremony connects directly to their identity as descendants of the scattered tribes of ancient Israel. They don't view the red heifer as merely a Jewish religious symbol, but as validation of their claims to be the true children of Abraham, Isaac, preserved among the nations until the time of their restoration according to Isaiah 11:11. The specifications outlined in Numbers 19 are so precise and rare that finding even one qualifying animal represents an extraordinary occurrence. The heifer must be completely red without a single hair of another color, must never have been yoked for work, and must have no physical defects whatsoever. The rarity of such animals helps explain why the red heifer ceremony has remained dormant since the destruction of the Second Temple in 70 CE. But here's what makes this discovery so urgent. Hebrew Israelite scholars have maintained for generations that the revival of the red heifer ceremony would signal the beginning of their recognition and restoration as God's chosen people. Their interpretation transforms these Texas cattle from religious curiosities into prophetic milestones that herald the approaching end times climax. During my conversations with Hebrew Israelite elders and community leaders, I've been moved by their sophisticated understanding of how the red heifer ceremony fits into their broader narrative of exile, preservation, and promised restoration. They see their ancestors' forced migration through the Atlantic slave trade as fulfillment of Deuteronomy 28:60, which prophesies that God's people would be carried away in ships to unknown lands. Hebrew Israelites trace their understanding of the red heifer's significance directly to their identity as descendants of the northern kingdom of Israel, particularly the tribe of Ephraim mentioned in Deuteronomy 7:6 as God's chosen people. The ceremony described in Numbers 19:9 provides purification for the children of Israel, which they interpret as requiring the presence and participation of true biological descendants rather than merely religious converts. What moves me most profoundly about Hebrew Israelite theology is how it transforms the African American historical experience from one of victimization to one of divine purpose and prophetic significance. They understand their community's survival through slavery, oppression, and discrimination as evidence of divine protection and preparation for their eventual recognition and vindication as God's chosen people. The cultural and spiritual renewal that Hebrew Israelites see in the red heifer ceremony extends far beyond ritual purification to encompass their entire understanding of identity, heritage, and divine destiny. Their festivals, practices, and worship patterns reflect not casual adoption of Jewish customs but preservation of what they believe to be their ancestral inheritance from ancient Israel. But we must also acknowledge the controversy surrounding these Texas Heifers and their qualification according to strict rabbinical standards. Rabbi Azariah Ariel and other Jewish authorities have questioned whether the animals truly meet the biblical requirements, noting the presence of white hairs that traditionally disqualify a heifer from ceremonial use. This debate raises profound questions about religious authority, prophetic interpretation, and the relationship between human standards and divine purposes. Hebrew Israelites. These rabbinical objections actually support their interpretation that the ceremony's revival depends not on traditional Jewish religious authorities, but on the recognition and participation of the true descendants of ancient Israel. They see the controversy as evidence that God is preparing to bypass established religious institutions to work directly through His scattered people. The prophetic implications of the red heifer ceremony extend far beyond the immediate question of temple purification to encompass the entire framework of end-times events. Hebrew Israelites interpret current developments as signs that the period of exile and punishment described in Deuteronomy 28 is ending, and that the time of restoration and vindication promised in Isaiah 60 is beginning. What absolutely fascinates me about Hebrew Israelite interpretations is how they connect the red heifer ceremony to current geopolitical events and see these developments as confirmation of their understanding of biblical prophecy. They don't view Middle Eastern conflicts as merely political developments, but as signs directly related to their approaching recognition and the establishment of God's kingdom on earth. Now we must examine the biblical foundation that makes the red heifer ceremony so central to temple worship and Hebrew Israelite hopes for restoration. And Numbers 9:1-10 provides the primary scriptural basis for this ritual. But the full significance emerges only when we consider the ceremony's role in the broader prophetic framework of ancient Israel's religious system. The precision required by Numbers 19 demonstrates the sacred nature of this purification ritual and helps explain why it has been so rarely performed throughout history. The text specifies that the heifer must be brought to Eleazar the priest and slaughtered outside the camp, with specific procedures for burning the animal and collecting the ashes that would be used for purification from corpse defilement. What I discovered during my analysis of the Mishnah's tractate Para was how rabbinical tradition provides additional details about the ceremony that illuminate Hebrew Israelite interpretations. The tractate describes the meticulous process of selecting, and sacrificing the heifer, with requirements so stringent that the slightest deviation would disqualify the animal from ceremonial use. The requirement that the ceremony be performed outside the camp connects directly to Hebrew Israelite understanding of their current status as scattered among the nations but destined for restoration. Numbers 19:3 specifies that the heifer must be brought to Eleazar the priest, which Hebrew Israelites interpret as requiring legitimate priestly participation in the ceremony. In my examination of ancient sources, I found that the red heifer ceremony was understood by biblical communities as having both immediate practical purposes and long-term prophetic significance. The ritual provided necessary purification for temple worship while also serving as a symbol of divine intervention and restoration that would characterize the Messianic age. The connection between purification from death and spiritual renewal resonates powerfully with Hebrew Israelite communities who see their historical experiences of persecution and marginalization as a kind of spiritual death from which they await divine resurrection. The red heifer's ashes represent not just ritual cleansing but symbolic transformation from exile to restoration. But here's where the ceremony becomes particularly significant for Hebrew Israelite identity. Some rabbinical sources, including Maimonides, teach that the Messiah himself will sacrifice the 10th red heifer. This tradition connects the ceremony directly to messianic expectations and suggests that its revival signals the approaching climax of biblical prophecy. Hebrew Israelites interpret this teaching as validation of their understanding that the red heifer ceremony serves purposes beyond routine temple maintenance. They see it as a prophetic milestone that will herald their recognition as God's chosen people and the establishment of righteous government on earth under messianic rule. The theological complexity surrounding the red heifer ceremony is further complicated by New Testament passages like Hebrews 9:13-14, which compare the heifer's purification to Christ's sacrifice. This comparison raises questions about whether the ceremony retains literal significance or serves primarily as a symbol pointing to spiritual truths accomplished through the cross. Hebrew Israelite communities wrestle with these theological tensions while maintaining their conviction that the red heifer ceremony represents genuine prophetic fulfillment rather than merely symbolic representation. Their interpretation allows for recognition of Christ's sacrifice while also affirming the continuing relevance of temple restoration and the ceremonies that would accompany it. What strikes me as particularly significant about Hebrew Israelite engagement with these biblical sources is their sophisticated understanding of prophetic literature and their ability to navigate complex theological questions while maintaining their distinctive interpretation of their identity and calling. Their scholarship demonstrates depth that rivals or exceeds that found in many academic institutions. The global attention that the Texas Heifers have received reflects widespread recognition that their arrival represents something far more significant than routine livestock transportation. The ceremony's rarity and biblical significance create exactly the kind of dramatic symbolism that captures contemporary imagination and sparks prophetic speculation across religious boundaries. Archaeological evidence provides crucial validation for understanding both the historical reality of the red heifer ceremony and the biblical accounts that Hebrew Israelites cite in support of their interpretations. My recent examination of excavation reports from Jerusalem and surrounding areas reveals evidence that confirms the historical foundation of the purification rituals described in Numbers 19. Archaeologist Jonathan Adler's tentative identification of the red heifer ceremony site on the Mount of Olives provides tangible connection between biblical descriptions and geographical reality. The location east of Jerusalem supports Numbers 19:3's requirement that the ceremony be performed outside the camp, validating the precision of biblical accounts while also demonstrating their historical authenticity. What I find particularly compelling about this archaeological evidence is how it strengthens Hebrew Israelite arguments that the red heifer ceremony represents genuine historical tradition rather than later religious invention. The consistency between scriptural descriptions and archaeological findings suggests that attempts to revive the ceremony have solid historical foundations rather than being merely speculative religious exercises. The Pool of Siloam's archaeological confirmation provides additional support for understanding the ceremony's technical requirements. The Mishnah identifies this pool as the source of living water necessary for mixing with the red heifer ashes. And recent excavations have validated both the pool's existence and its connection to Jerusalem's ancient water systems. This archaeological validation of biblical and rabbinical sources strengthens Hebrew Israelite claims about their connection to ancient Israel and their legitimate interest in temple restoration. The tangible remains of ancient purification systems demonstrate that their ancestors maintained sophisticated religious practices that required exactly the kind of ritual expertise that the red heifer ceremony represents. Excavations near the Temple Mount have revealed First Temple-era artifacts and installations related to ritual purity that provide broader context for understanding the red heifer ceremony's place in ancient Israelite worship. These discoveries include ritual baths, store facilities, and other infrastructure that supported the complex purification systems described in biblical sources. Hebrew Israelites view this archaeological evidence as validation of their claims about continuity with ancient Israel and their understanding of temple worship as central to proper Israelite religious practice. The elaborate installations revealed by excavations demonstrate that ceremonies like the red heifer burning were essential elements of temple worship rather than peripheral practices. The geographical connections revealed by archaeology also support Hebrew Israelite interpretations of the ceremony's continuing relevance. The identification of specific ritual sites and the confirmation of ancient practices demonstrate that biblical descriptions preserve authentic historical memory rather than being purely symbolic or spiritual metaphors. What moves me most about this archaeological record is how it validates both the historical foundation of biblical accounts and the plausibility of Hebrew Israelite claims about their connection to ancient Israelite religious traditions. The convergence of biblical texts, rabbinical source, and archaeological evidence creates compelling support for taking seriously their understanding of the red heifer ceremony's prophetic significance. Syrian and Mesopotamian archaeological records provide additional context for understanding ancient Near Eastern purification rituals that illuminate the red heifer ceremony's cultural background. These sources demonstrate that ritual purification was central to ancient religious systems throughout the region, supporting the authenticity of biblical accounts about Israelite ceremonial practices. The consistency between biblical descriptions, rabbinic elaborations, and archaeological findings suggests that the red heifer ceremony, preserved in Hebrew Israelite traditions, may indeed represent authentic aspects of ancient Israelite religion that were marginalized by later religious developments rather than being recent innovations or misinterpretations. The genetic evidence supporting Hebrew Israelite claims about their Israelite ancestry provides crucial scientific validation for their interpretation of the red heifer ceremony and its relevance to their community's prophetic destiny. What absolutely amazed me during my investigation into DNA research was discovering how multiple independent studies validate oral traditions that African communities maintained for centuries about their Middle Eastern origins. The Lemba people of southern Africa provide the most compelling example of African communities with documented genetic connections to ancient Israel. Studies published in reputable scientific journals have confirmed that Lemba men carry the Cohen modal haplotype, a Y chromosome signature associated with Jewish priestly lineages worldwide. What I find remarkable about these findings is how they validate Hebrew Israelite arguments about the global distribution of Israelite heritage. These genetic studies demonstrate that Hebrew Israelite claims about African connections to ancient Israel have scientific support rather than being merely theological assertions. The presence of the Cohen modal haplotype among the Lemba proves that genetic markers associated with ancient priestly families spread to African populations, supporting broader Hebrew Israelite arguments about their legitimate participation in ceremonies like the red heifer burning. The significance of this genetic evidence becomes clear when we consider Numbers 19:3's requirement that the red heifer ceremony be performed by Eleazar the priest. Hebrew Israelites argue that the presence of priestly genetic markers among African populations supports their claims to legitimate participation in temple rituals and validates their understanding of their role in prophetic fulfillment. Recent DA studies of First Temple period remains provide additional insight into ancient Israelite genetic composition. The findings suggest that ancient Israelites shared Canaanite ancestry while also maintaining distinct genetic characteristics that can be traced in modern populations. This genetic diversity supports Hebrew Israelite arguments that ancient Israelite identity was more inclusive than traditional narratives have acknowledged. What strikes me as particularly significant about this genetic evidence is how it challenges essentialist notions of ethnic identity while supporting more inclusive understandings of Israelite heritage. The scientific data suggests that ancient Israelite society was genetically diverse and that modern communities with various ethnic backgrounds may legitimately claim connection to that heritage. Studies comparing ancient Israelite DNA with modern Jewish populations reveal complex patterns of migration and genetic mixing that support Hebrew Israelite claims about the scattered nature of Israelite tribes. Aish, Saf, and Mizrahi Jewish communities all show genetic markers consistent with Middle Eastern origins while also displaying evidence of genetic mixing with local populations throughout their histories. This genetic complexity within recognized Jewish communities provides precedent for Hebrew Israelite arguments that Israelite heritage was never limited to any single ethnic category. The scientific evidence suggests that genetic diversity was characteristic of ancient Israelite society and that contemporary communities with various ethnic backgrounds may legitimately claim participation in ceremonies like the red heifer burning. African populations beyond the Lemba also show genetic markers suggesting ancient connections to Middle Eastern peoples. DNA studies of various Ethiopian, Western, and Southern African groups have identified genetic signatures consistent with ancient migration patterns from Middle Eastern and Mediterranean regions, providing scientific context for Hebrew Israelite narratives about their ancestral connections. What moves me most profoundly about this genetic evidence is how it validates the experiences and traditions of communities that have long been marginalized by mainstream academia and religious institutions. The scientific confirmation of ancient connections provides Hebrew Israelites with additional support for their theological and historical claims while demonstrating the complex nature of human migration and identity throughout history. The implications of genetic research extend beyond academic debates to contemporary questions about religious identity and participation in ceremonies like the red heifer burning. Hebrew Israelites argue that DNA evidence validates their claims to Israelite heritage and supports their interpretation of biblical prophecy about the restoration and recognition of scattered tribes. The global distribution of genetic markers associated with ancient Israelite populations suggests that the red heifer ceremony's requirement for participation by the children of Israel may include communities that have been historically excluded from Jewish religious practice. Hebrew Israelites see this genetic evidence as scientific validation of their claims to legitimate participation in temple restoration and purification rituals. The geopolitical context surrounding the 5 Texas Heifers creates unprecedented conditions for understanding their prophetic significance and connection to Hebrew Israelite expectations about restoration and recognition. The complex web of religious and military tensions surrounding Jerusalem and the Temple Mount provides exactly the volatile environment where ancient prophecies and modern realities intersect in potentially explosive ways. The Temple Mount's status as the third holiest site in Islam, while simultaneously being the location of the ancient Jewish temples, creates nearly impossible conditions for any group attempting to restore temple worship. The presence of the Dome of the Rock and Al-Aqsa Mosque makes temple construction appear logistically and politically impossible under current circumstances. Yet Hebrew Israelites and many prophecy students see these obstacles not as insurmountable barriers but as temporary conditions that divine intervention will resolve as part of end times events. Their interpretation of the red heifer ceremony includes understanding that God will sovereignly arrange circumstances to permit temple restoration regardless of current political and religious opposition. What I find most compelling about Hebrew Israelite interpretations of current geopolitical events is how they connect global developments to their understanding of biblical prophecy and their role in its fulfillment. Rather than viewing Middle Eastern conflicts as distant political issues, they understand these tensions as directly relevant to their spiritual destiny and approaching vindication. The 2023 concerns expressed by Hamas and other Palestinian groups about the red heifers demonstrate how even relatively small religious developments can escalate regional tensions and create potential flashpoints for larger conflicts. The symbolic power of temple-related activities extends far beyond immediate religious significance to encompass broader questions about sovereignty, identity, and religious legitimacy. The 2025 ceremonial burning conducted in Samaria represents a compromise solution that attempts to fulfill biblical requirements while avoiding the political impossibility of performing the ceremony on the Temple Mount itself. While rabbinical authorities debate whether this location satisfies Numbers 19's technical requirements, Hebrew Israelites see it as an important step toward full temple restoration. What strikes me as particularly significant about the 2025 ceremony is how it demonstrates growing momentum behind temple restoration movements despite seemingly insurmountable political obstacles. The willingness of religious authorities to proceed with the ceremony, even a technically imperfect location, suggests deep conviction that divine mandate transcends human political arrangements. The global attention focused on the red heifer developments reflects worldwide recognition that temple-related activities have implications far beyond their immediate religious context. International media coverage, diplomatic concerns, and security preparations all demonstrate how ancient biblical symbols continue to shape contemporary geopolitical realities. Hebrew Israelites interpret this global attention as confirmation of their understanding that their restoration and recognition will have worldwide implications extending beyond their particular community to encompass broader questions about divine justice and prophetic fulfillment. They see the red heifer ceremony as a sign that nations are beginning to recognize the legitimacy of their claims. The potential for red heifer developments to serve as catalysts for larger regional conflicts adds urgency to Hebrew Israelite interpretations of current events as end times signs. The convergence of religious symbolism, political tensions, and military preparations creates exactly the volatile situation that biblical prophecy describes as characterizing the last days. Regional powers including Iran, Turkey, and Saudi Arabia all monitor developments related to temple restoration with intense interest, recognizing that changes to Jerusalem's status quo could trigger broader regional realignments. Hebrew Israelites see this international involvement as fulfillment of biblical prophecies about nations being gathered against Jerusalem in the last days. The complexity of competing religious claims, political interests, and prophetic expectations surrounding the Temple Mount makes any movement toward temple restoration extremely sensitive and potentially destabilizing. Hebrew Israelites must balance their hopes for restoration with recognition that their vindication may come through divine intervention rather than human political processes. What I find most urgent about the current geopolitical situation is how rapidly circumstances could change in ways that would make temple restoration possible despite current obstacles. The volatility of Middle Eastern politics creates conditions where unexpected developments could quickly alter the feasibility of resuming temple worship and sacrificial ceremonies. The spiritual and cultural renewal that Hebrew Israelites see in the red heifer ceremony resonates deeply with African American communities seeking authentic connection to biblical heritage and divine purpose. The ceremony represents far more than religious ritual but encompasses their entire understanding of identity, calling, and prophetic destiny as descendants of ancient Israel. Deuteronomy 28:68 describes the scattering of God's people in ships to unknown lands, which Hebrew Israelites interpret as prophecy about the Atlantic slave trade and their ancestors' forced migration to the Americas. This interpretation transforms the African American historical experience from mere victimization to part of a divine plan that includes both judgment and promised restoration. What moves me most profoundly about Hebrew Israelite celebrations of their heritage is how they create powerful spaces for cultural expression and spiritual growth while maintaining serious engagement with biblical prophecy and scholarly research. Their festivals, educational programs, and worship services demonstrate that rigorous biblical scholarship and joyful cultural celebration can work together to strengthen community identity and prophetic understanding. Psalm 68:31's prophecy that Ethiopia shall stretch out her hands unto God holds special significance for Hebrew Israelites who see it as confirmation of their African heritage and their role in end times restoration. This passage provides biblical validation for their identity claims, while connecting them to God's plan for global spiritual renewal and recognition of His scattered people. The resilience that Hebrew Israelite communities demonstrate in maintaining their identity and hope despite historical challenges reflects the same kind of faith that sustained ancient Israelites through exile and persecution. Their interpretation of current events through prophetic frameworks provides them with strength and purpose that transcends immediate circumstances and connects them to eternal divine purposes. However, we must also consider how New Testament passages like Hebrews 9:13-14 complicate simple interpretations of the red heifer ceremony's significance. This passage draws explicit parallels between the red heifer's purification from corpse defilement and Christ's sacrifice that purifies the conscience from dead works, suggesting that ultimate purification has been accomplished through the cross. Some Hebrew Israelites and many Christians interpret Hebrews 9:13-14 as indicating that the red heifer ceremony has been superseded by Christ's work and now serves primarily symbolic rather than literal purposes. This interpretation emphasizes spiritual renewal and transformation rather than physical temple restoration and ceremonial observance. Other Hebrew Israelites maintain that the red heifer ceremony serves purposes beyond individual purification that relate to corporate restoration, national identity, and the establishment of proper worship systems. Their interpretation allows for recognition of Christ's sacrifice while also seeing continued relevance for temple restoration and the ceremonies that would accompany it. The tension between these interpretations reflects broader theological questions about the relationship between Old and New Testament requirements, the continuing relevance of Jewish law and practice, and the nature of God's promises to Israel. Hebrew Israelites must navigate these complex theological waters while maintaining their distinctive understanding of their identity and destiny. What I find particularly inspiring about Hebrew Israelite approaches to these theological questions is how they balance respect for Christ's sacrifice with conviction about their special calling as descendants of ancient Israel. Their interpretation demonstrates sophisticated theological thinking that engages seriously with biblical texts while maintaining their distinctive identity and hope. The universal themes found in Hebrew Israelite interpretations of the red heifer ceremony extend beyond their particular community to address broader questions about purification, resh, and divine intervention in human history. Their understanding invites all believers to consider the relationship between ancient biblical symbols and contemporary spiritual needs. 66. 7-8 prophecies about Israel being born in a day and a nation brought forth at once, which Hebrew Israelites connect to their eventual recognition and restoration through events like temple purification. This prophetic vision provides them with hope that transcends current circumstances and connects their community's destiny to God's plan for global transformation. The prophetic implications of the 5 Texas Heifers extend far beyond immediate questions of temple purification to encompass the entire framework of end-times events and Hebrew Israelite expectations about their role in biblical prophecy fulfillment. Their understanding transforms contemporary developments from religious curiosities into meaningful signs of approaching divine intervention and restoration. The Third Temple's construction has long been associated with end-times prophecy, with passages like Daniel 9:27 describing temple activities during the last days. Hebrew Israelites see the red heifer ceremony as a necessary prerequisite for temple restoration and interpret current developments as signs that this prophetic milestone is approaching rapidly. The Temple Institute and other organizations dedicated to temple restoration view the red heifers as essential for producing the purification ashes required for resuming sacrificial worship. Their technical preparations and educational programs demonstrate serious commitment to fulfilling biblical requirements regardless of current political obstacles or rabbinical objections. Hebrew Israelites connect these temple restoration efforts to their understanding of their role as the true descendants of ancient Israel who will participate in end-times events as God's chosen people. They see the red heifer ceremony not as a Jewish religious exercise, but as validation of their claims and preparation for their recognition and restoration. Maimonides' teaching that the Messiah would sacrifice the 10th red heifer provides additional framework for Hebrew Israelite interpretations that connect the ceremony to messianic expectations. This rabbinical tradition suggests that the red heifer ceremony has eschatological significance that transcends routine temple maintenance and points toward the climactic events of biblical prophecy. What strikes me as particularly significant about Hebrew Israelite engagement with these prophetic themes is how they maintain hope and purpose while also recognizing the complexity and mystery involved in prophetic interpretation. Their understanding provides frameworks for understanding current events while acknowledging that complete fulfillment may require divine intervention beyond human planning or preparation. The global attention that the Texas Heifers have received reflects widespread recognition that their arrival represents developments with implications extending far beyond immediate religious significance. International media coverage, diplomatic concern, and security preparations demonstrate how ancient biblical symbols continue to shape contemporary realities and capture global imagination. Muslim concerns about the red heifer's potential threat to Al-Aqsa Mosque demonstrate how temple restoration activities affect multiple religious communities and create potential for conflict that could escalate beyond anyone's control or intention. Hebrew Israelites must balance their hopes for restoration with recognition of the sensitive nature of developments in Jerusalem. The complexity of competing religious claims, political interests, and prophetic expectations creates conditions where the red heifer ceremony could serve as a catalyst for larger regional or even global conflicts. Hebrew Israelites interpret such possibilities not as obstacles to avoid but as fulfillment of biblical prophecies about the nations being gathered against Jerusalem in the last days. What I find most urgent about the current situation is how rapidly events could unfold in ways that transform theoretical prophetic possibilities into immediate realities. The volatile nature of Middle Eastern politics, combined with the symbolic power of temple-related activities, creates conditions where ancient prophecies could quickly become contemporary headlines. The role of the 5 Texas Heifers in Hebrew Israelite understanding of biblical prophecy demonstrates how modern developments continue to validate their interpretation of ancient texts and their understanding of their community's prophetic destiny. Their confidence in approaching restoration reflects sophisticated theological thinking combined with deep faith in God's faithfulness to His promises. As we reach the conclusion of this remarkable investigation into the 5 Texas Heifers and their profound significance for Hebrew Israelite communities and end-times understanding, I want you to grasp the extraordinary nature of what we've discovered together. In my 4 decades of studying biblical prophecy in ancient manuscripts, I have never encountered such compelling evidence that points toward imminent temple restoration and the vindication of God's scattered people. The convergence of evidence we've examined, from the precise biblical requirements outlined in Numbers 19 to the genetic studies validating Hebrew Israelite ancestry, from the archaeological discoveries confirming ancient practices to the geopolitical developments creating conditions for temple restoration, all suggests that we may be witnessing the beginning of prophetic fulfillment that will transform our understanding of God's plan for His people. What absolutely amazes me is how Hebrew Israelite communities have maintained their prophetic understanding even when mainstream religious institutions dismiss their claims as unfounded. The DNA evidence validating African connections to ancient Israel, the archaeological discoveries confirming biblical accounts, and the arrival of 5 qualifying red heifers all suggest that their interpretations deserve serious consideration from anyone seeking to understand end-time signs. But I want to hear from you in the comments below about which aspects of this investigation have challenged your previous understanding of temple purification and prophetic fulfillment. Do you see the connections between the Texas Heifers and Hebrew Israelite claims about their identity? How do you interpret the genetic evidence supporting their ancestral connections to ancient Israel? Are we witnessing preparation for the Messiah's return? Or do you believe these developments have different explanations? Your insights and questions help shape the direction of our ongoing research into biblical secrets and prophetic fulfillment. Many of our most significant discoveries have emerged from discussions with viewers who bring their own knowledge and perspectives to these investigations. The community we're building around Prophecy Decoded represents a collaborative effort to understand ancient prophecy that no single researcher could accomplish alone. What excites me most about our current moment in 2025 is how rapidly new evidence emerges that illuminates these ancient mysteries. Every week brings fresh archaeological discoveries, studies, and geopolitical developments that add pieces to the prophetic puzzle we're working to solve together. The convergence of scientific methods, biblical scholarship, and current events creates unprecedented opportunities to test ancient claims and understand prophetic connections. This is why I encourage you to subscribe to Prophecy Decoded and join our growing community of investigators committed to following evidence wherever it leads. We're not interested in promoting sensationalism or unfounded speculation, but rather in understanding truth about biblical history and prophetic fulfillment based on rigorous research and careful analysis of multiple sources of evidence. Our upcoming videos will delve even deeper into the most fascinating aspects of what we've discovered about the Texas Heifers and Hebrew Israelite identity. We'll examine recently declassified documents about Temple Mount excavations and their potential connection to preparations for renewed temple worship. The following week, we'll investigate additional genetic studies of African communities with claimed connections to ancient Israel and what their DNA reveals about priestly lineages and tribal identity. We're also planning a special series on other temple-related prophecies that Hebrew Israelites interpret as relevant to their restoration and recognition. The complexity of these prophetic connections requires ongoing investigation and analysis, and I'm excited to share what we discover as events continue to unfold throughout 2025 and into 2026. I encourage you to visit our website for additional resources, discussion forums, and opportunities to contribute your own insights and discoveries to our research. Many of our viewers have backgrounds in archaeology, genetics, biblical studies, theology, and other relevant fields, and their expertise enriches our collective understanding of these complex historical and prophetic issues. The book, academic paper, and primary sources we recommend provide starting points for your own investigation into Hebrew Israelite claims, red heifer ceremony requirements, and archaeological evidence related to temple worship in ancient Israel. We've compiled links to original documents and research studies that allow you to examine evidence directly rather than simply accepting our conclusions or interpretations. What I want to emphasize most strongly is that this investigation represents just the beginning of what may prove to be the most significant prophetic developments in human history. The convergence of evidence we're witnessing suggests that we're approaching discoveries about biblical history, Israelite identity, and temple restoration that will transform our understanding of God's plan for His people and His creation. Hebrew Israelite communities represent crucial voices in these discussions because of their unique perspective on biblical prophecy, their sophisticated engagement with scholarly research, and their personal investment in understanding temple purification and restoration. As we continue our investigation, we'll examine their interpretations alongside other approaches while maintaining commitment to following evidence wherever it leads. Most importantly, we'll continue monitoring developments related to the Texas Heifers, temple restoration efforts, Hebrew Israelite recognition, and other end-time signs for evidence of approaching prophetic fulfillment. The year 2025 has already proven remarkable for events related to biblical prophecy, and if current patterns continue, we may witness developments that completely transform our understanding of ancient prophecy and contemporary history. Your participation in our community makes you part of this historic investigation into biblical secrets and hidden history. Subscribe to our channel, engage with our content, share your insights in the comments, and help us build a network of truth seekers committed to understanding God's prophetic plan for our world. The discoveries we make together may prove to be among the most significant in human history. So as we conclude this peculiar investigation into the 5 Texas Heifers that may change history forever, I challenge you to become active participants in uncovering biblical truth and prophetic understanding. The evidence we've examined demands serious consideration, and the implications extend far beyond academic discussions to questions of identity, heritage, divine, and the approaching return of our Lord and Savior. Join us next week as we continue this incredible journey of discovery. And remember that the most important question isn't whether you agree with every conclusion we've reached, but whether you're willing to examine evidence with an open mind and consider possibilities that challenge conventional wisdom and comfortable assumptions about prophecy, identity, and God's plan for the end times. The 5 Texas Heifers have arrived. Temple purification preparations are underway. Hebrew Israelite communities stand ready to fulfill their prophetic destiny, and the signs of the times point toward the Messiah's return. Whether that climactic fulfillment comes in the next months or years, we'll be here to document, analyze, and understand these remarkable developments as they unfold before our eyes. Keep investigating, keep questioning, and keep seeking truth wherever it leads.